Please join us on our cruise to South America and up the Amazon River. On November 20th, we left Fort Lauderdale, Florida aboard the Volendam, one of the smaller ships in the Holland America fleet. The following photos will provide some insight into what the ship was like. This was our room, small but quite comfortable. And this is a view down one of the many hallways. One of two pools. In foul weather, the cover on the right could be completely closed. The carpets in each of the elevators always reflected what day it was. On a cruise, the days seemed to run together, so these rugs served a useful purpose. As we were on board during the Christmas season, many areas of the ship were beautifully decorated. This was one of two almost identical food lines in the Lido restaurant. The food was very good and the choices seemed almost unlimited. A sample of the dessert area. If you wished, you could also dine in a non-buffet style restaurant, which we did sometimes. Here we are having dinner with friends and oftentimes travel companions, Chuck and Barb. The casino, which we did not utilize, was quite large and seemed to have a wide array of gaming opportunities. After several days at sea, we made our first stop. St. Bart's is a very upscale island in the Caribbean and a playground for celebrities of the world. This is one of the narrow downtown streets. This is Shell Beach. We spent some time on the beach, but for some unremembered reason, regretfully, none of us brought our bathing suits. This is a view from Fort Carl, situated high on a hill. In the distance you can see the Volendam. As you'll see, on some of the stops we were able to dock next to the shore, and on other stops, such as this, we were required to anchor offshore and be shuttled onto the mainland in small boats. The small harbor at St. Bart's. Our next stop was another Caribbean island called St. Lucia. This sign made us laugh, but we also kept looking up. This time we all brought our bathing suits and took a cab to one of the local beaches. Chuck and Barb, afloat in the Caribbean. As we were leaving St. Lucia, we passed some gorgeous scenery. After a few days at sea, we entered the mouth of the Amazon. At this point, the river was very wide and large ships were seen headed in both directions. Smaller boats such as this were prolific. The river is the superhighway of the area, and these craft are the equivalent of buses or taxicabs for all who live near the water. At 4 a.m. on Friday, November 29th, the entire ship awoke to an emergency broadcast over the PA system. Unbelievable as it sounds, we had run aground on a sandbar. There were no tugboats available on this stretch of the Amazon large enough to pull us off the bar, so the captain implemented a series of moves designed to free us. They transferred all fuel from the forward tanks to the rear, drained the forwardmost swimming pool, and worked the side thrusters back and forth to try to wiggle us loose. Finally, after 7 hours, these efforts paid off, and we were able to resume the voyage. As you might imagine, it was an embarrassing time for the captain and his crew. While all this was going on, we passengers just continued to relax and enjoy ourselves. Here, a small tributary joins the Amazon. During the months leading up to our trip, we had seen news stories about the massive fires burning in the Amazon region of Brazil, but we didn't see much in the way of fires, with few exceptions. The town of Santarém, our first stop along the river. We were supposed to spend a day here, but the grounding messed that up and we only stopped for a few hours. Local vendors displayed a wide variety of crafts and souvenirs on the dock next to the Volendam. Not sure why, but we felt compelled to purchase 3 of these dried piranhas as gifts. Underway and heading west the following day, we saw many of these barge trains carrying grain and other staples along the river. On December 1st, we arrived at the city of Manaus, 900 miles into the interior of Brazil. This was a mural painted on a concrete bridge abutment in the city. Here, Barb is being greeted by some local youth in traditional attire as we leave the ship to tour Manaus. Manaus is the capital of the state of Amazonas, and in the late 1800s was the richest city in Brazil due to the rubber industry. European architecture is seen in abundance throughout the city. This cathedral is located on one of the main plazas in the city. This fountain and the surrounding statues are made of cast iron and were imported from Belgium during the rubber boom. And this is the famous Italian Renaissance-style opera house in Manaus. The venue brings top-flight entertainment from around the world to the heat of the Amazonian jungle. More European-style architecture. We decided that one good way to ensure seeing the great diversity of animals native to the Amazon region was to visit a zoo. This one was actually operated by the Brazilian Army, and there were soldiers stationed throughout the facility. This is Monkey Island. In the small aquarium were displayed examples of some of the huge fish that inhabit the local river. More about this guy later. The zoo also featured many species of exotic birds. Jenny, fending off a hungry predator. Here we see a veritable logjam of water taxis and transport boats tied up in the harbor. And this family barely caught up to the garbage scow as it was heading out of the harbor. The following morning, we headed west on a small boat to the jungle outside of the city. This recently completed bridge was sort of a bridge to nowhere. The city is on the right, but there are only a few small villages beyond the left or the south end of the bridge. The hope is that this bridge will lead to development of an entire new region as the years pass. The purpose of this tour was to demonstrate some of the subsistence and survival techniques employed by the groups who inhabit the jungle. The fellow on the left was our guide, and on the right is Pedro, who has lived his entire life in this area. Here they're making a fire, not an easy task in a rainforest. And here, Pedro is rigging a snare to catch small animals. In this case, he's attached a bow and arrow to a tripwire in an effort to skewer a passing animal. One method of obtaining safe drinking water was demonstrated. They chopped off about a 3-foot section of thick jungle vine. As you can see here, the vine contained quite a bit of drinking water. To aid in climbing a tree, Pedro twisted palm fronds into a loop. He then placed the loop between his ankles. As he climbed, the palm loop provided traction for the tree trunk, allowing him to shinny up. In this case, he was going for acai berries that grow near the top of the tree. I've not mentioned it yet, but it was summer in the Amazon region and the temperatures were often in the high 90s, accompanied by high humidity. That certainly was the case on this jungle trip. Here we were boarding a small boat that would return us to Manaus. Leaving Manaus, we began working our way east, back toward the Atlantic Ocean. The next stop was Parintins, a small town located on an island in the river and famous for an annual festival called Boi Bumba. The two oxes on this sign are important characters in the festival. The harbor area of Parintins. In Parintins, rather than using their own small boats to shuttle passengers ashore, Holland America, our cruise line, decided to rent some of the local water transport vessels. Local Boy Scouts were employed to assist passengers. Here, a scout helps an elderly man up a rather steep ramp. Two of the helpful scouts. This is a typical transport boat. Note the hammocks on the upper deck. Since these boats often travel long distances on the river, passengers simply set up their own hammocks and relax during the journey. This family was waiting for a boat that would take them home to their village after a day of shopping in the city, just like sitting on a bus stop in the U.S. And here they are boarding the transport boat. This was sort of like a Chamber of Commerce building at the harbor. A statue of Jesus and a friend atop the building. Here again are the two main characters in the Boi Bumba festival, the red and white ox Garantido and the blue and black ox Caprichoso. The actual festival takes place each year in June and lasts for 3 days. What we saw was a 1-hour version of it, and it was spectacular. All of the participants were dressed in elaborate costumes with brilliant colors, feathers, and sequins. Each of the central characters entered the stage on a huge rolling and sometimes animated float. The young man here was actually carrying this oversized panel of masks and feathers. Note the leather straps on his shoulders supporting the panel. This actress was rolled onto the stage, seemingly being carried by the large bird whose wings actually flapped. Singing and dancing were constants throughout the performance. It seemed like no one ever stopped moving. Her sign reads, "We are the people of the forest." At the end of the performance, the audience was invited to join in the dancing. This is Don Chiafordini, a Volendam passenger that we met that day and have since stayed in touch with. It's hard to see in this picture, but he was wearing oversized sunglasses with a crown attached to the top of them, and we began calling him the King. Outside of the performance venue, we were approached by a local dignitary who asked if we would mind speaking to students who were studying English. At first, the kids were bashful and self-conscious of their language skills, but in a few minutes they all loosened up and we had a great time with them. Some scenes from around the city of Parintins. I was most interested in all the motorbikes. They were obviously the primary mode of transportation. We saw kids being picked up from school by moms on motorbikes, just like moms in the U.S. might do with minivans. And they also served the same purpose as small trucks do in the U.S. Next stop for the Volendam was the small town of Alta de Chao, which is a resort area for the people living in Santarém. This was another place where the ship had to anchor offshore, and passengers were brought to the mainland via small boats called tenders. Passengers were greeted by local dancers and musicians. The following are some photos taken while walking around town. Note the large cistern in the upper left. These devices for capturing and storing rainwater were extremely common in many of the areas that we visited. The local cathedral. Beautiful murals and other forms of public art were found in many of the areas that we visited. This one had clear political overtones, with the man in the suit sucking water from the rural regions. A restaurant. Siesta. The blue and pink dolphins near the center of the sign are part of a local folk story. Chuck and I taking a well-deserved break from all of our touring. Barb and Jenny. This was called Love Island. Small boats were available to rent to get over to the island, but in actuality, you could easily wade over to it. Folks relaxing at the beach. Swimming in the Amazon. No piranha here, or at least I hope not. Back on the ship. This is another typical view of jungle along the shoreline. Our last stop in Brazil was the large and modern city of Belém. The skyline of Belém. The port where the ship docked was actually in the city of Icarachi, and we were then bused to Belém, an hour away. While on the bus, we passed numerous open-air shops like this one, featuring fish. Again, we see the strong European influence in some of the architecture. This woman was selling jewelry, one of many vendors along one of the main streets. We walked a ways to a very large marketplace that turned out to be a highlight of our stop in Belém. This was not a market geared to tourists, rather it was where the locals did their weekly shopping. It happened to be a Saturday morning and the place was packed. The following are some of the shots that we took at the market. There were numerous tables featuring piles of dried fish. Remember the large river fish from the Manaus Zoo? These are the remains of some of his relatives. This poster provides an idea of just how large these fish are. As we were looking at the fish, a young man explained that we might not like this type of fish because it was very salty. He said that's how the Brazilians like it, but that we should go a few stalls down and ask to taste the gringo version, which is not as salty. We thanked him and said we would, but we didn't. More fish. Lots of live animals of all types on sale. Dinner on the run. A selection of meats. No refrigeration going on here or anywhere else that we saw at the market. This fellow was dispensing some type of cold drink from this steel container. Note the spigot on the end of his can. Belém is quite close to the Atlantic Ocean, and this fellow seemed to be patiently waiting for the tide to come in and float his boat. And this man was loading buckets of acai berries onto another boat. In an effort to get passengers on and off the ship more quickly, the cruise line hired local double-decker transport boats. This turned out to be a big mistake. The docking area was very crowded, and they had to wait in line to let people on and off, which took quite a while. A second problem was that as the day turned into evening, the waters became too rough for these boats to safely tie up to the Volendam. As a result, some of the folks did not get back on board until well after dark. We got back on board in plenty of time, and on our way were treated to the antics of about 10 kiteboarders who made repeated passes at the boat, showing off their skills. Fun to watch. On this trip, we crossed and recrossed the equator several times. When you make your first crossing, you are transformed from a pollywog to a shellback. Here, members of the crew who were first-time equator crossers had to participate in a ritual. They are bowing before a tribunal of officers who will decide whether or not they are worthy of becoming shellbacks. The fellow on the left in the green outfit is King Neptune. The tribunal ordered the pollywogs to be covered in slimy paint, and then to do this, with all the passengers chanting, "Kiss the fish! Kiss the fish!" Once again, out in the Atlantic, our next stop was Devil's Island. Our departure was delayed a bit by foggy conditions, but here tenders had begun carrying people ashore. 3 islands make up this complex off the coast of French Guiana. We were actually on Ile de Royale, where guards and administrators resided. Devil's Island was a penal colony where the worst of the worst criminals in France were sent. The only monkeys that we saw in South America were in the zoo at Manaus. They were abundant in this place. Here are a few photos of the children's cemetery. More monkeys. Devil's Island was in use from 1852 to 1953 and often housed political prisoners as well as hardened criminals. Most of the buildings were in reasonably good shape. The church. Here's a shifty-looking character. Reminds me of Wilson on Tim Allen's Home Improvement show. These islands really had a tropical vibe. Next stop was Barbados. We spent a morning on this catamaran and went snorkeling with sea turtles. The crew were all extroverts, and when the swimming ended, they served an elaborate lunch with drinks of every kind. Jenny entering the water and returning from the turtle swim. Relaxing on the trampoline. Then, on to Aruba. In the morning, we were signed up for a submarine excursion. On our way out to where the sub was anchored. The sub with a tender. Descending into the sub. Inside the sub. The next shots were taken through the portholes. This is a lionfish. We passed by several boats that had been intentionally sunk to provide habitat for undersea creatures. A barracuda. This was as deep as we got. It was a pretty cool trip. This iguana was waiting for us when we got back to the dock. That afternoon, along with Chuck and Barb, we took public transportation to the end of the island and the town of San Nicolas. The main reason we chose to go there was because of all the murals. The entire town was essentially an outdoor gallery. Almost every wall or fence displayed a mural of some sort. This one was done using mosaic tiles. Here we have a 3D angel that bore a striking resemblance to Jenny. Most of the benches in town were also covered with mosaic designs. We ended our time in Aruba with a cold beer at this bar back in Oranjestad, where our ship was tied up. The following day was spent in Curacao, an island not too far from Aruba. This is the famous floating bridge in Willemstad, Curaçao's capital. The bridge is secured to a giant pin on the far side of this photo. When a ship wishes to pass, the near side pivots to the left until it reaches the far shore. Think of it as the minute hand on a clock rotating from 6 to 9. When the ship passes, the bridge returns to its original position. With strong Dutch ties, the architecture is very similar to what you would see in the cities of Holland. This is a Chichi woman. These sculptures, always painted in vibrant colors, are found throughout the area and are a unique part of Curaçao's culture. Street art was also prevalent here, but not to the degree that we saw it in San Nicolas. This ferry stands by to transport people across the water when the bridge is open for an extended period of time. Despite the fact that we were in the tropics and it was fairly hot and humid, it was hard to forget that it was December 14th and Christmas was right around the corner. Here's something that you would likely not see in the U.S. This historical old fort was well preserved, but was turned into a shopping center. A restaurant atop the fort. Each of the arches below contained a small boutique shop of some kind. On the right, you can see the walls of the fort, and on the left, the brightly colored shops associated with the lavish Renaissance Resort Hotel. These kids are having a great time running and dancing in the waters of this fountain. The beach and infinity pool pictured here were part of the aforementioned resort hotel. A very large Chi-Chi sculpture outside the Renaissance. A bar that we passed on the way back to the ship. Captain Morgan is pretty popular in these parts. Leaving Willemstad that evening, passing the opened floating bridge. And this is the pilot boat guiding us to open water. Several days later, we arrived in Falmouth, Jamaica. A view from the ship in the harbor. The Jamaican flag. And this is Elvis. There are numerous ways to see the town of Falmouth. Tour buses, taxis, bicycle rickshaws, etc. But we decided to walk. Before we had gone a block, Elvis injected himself into our day and began walking with us, pointing out interesting aspects of the town. I was a little standoffish at first, but it soon became apparent that he knew everyone in town and they all knew him. So we got to see things that we would not have seen without him. For example, we were able to go into this church, where these kids were performing a Christmas pageant. This was certainly not a tourist venue, and we felt honored to be able to witness the event. He took us through the neighborhood where he lives, and we got to see a truer picture of the area. Before parting ways, Elvis showed us a very favorable TripAdvisor review that some woman had written about him, and he was beaming with pride. Before reboarding our ship, we stopped at Falmouth's Margaritaville. What would a stop in Jamaica be without a few red stripe beers? Ginny with the land shark. The following day, we landed in Georgetown in the Cayman Islands. We were bussed to a place called Dolphin Cove, where we participated in 2 different tours. The first stop was a place called Stingray City, a sandbar several miles off the coast. The story is that fishermen used to come to the sandbar each day and clean their fish, which attracted the stingrays who ate the fish waste. Now, the tourists come every day and bring chum to feed the rays. We saw this place on a National Geographic show a while back, and the host was all by himself, surrounded by rays. So that's the mental picture that we held. Well, that ain't how it is. The number of boats and people in the water was amazing, yet the stingrays were everywhere. The dark shadows beneath the water in these pictures are the rays. The creatures were obviously docile, and the only warning we received was not to step on them. In the next series of photos, you will see Ginny getting up close and personal with one of these amazing fishes. While there, we ran into some friends from our ship who were taking a different tour. This is David Gross from Illinois, and his wife Claudia. The Grosses have been on many, many cruises and provided us a wealth of information. This girl was getting the old Stingray blanket treatment. That afternoon, we returned to Dolphin Cove for the second of the day's tours. I would call what they do an interactive trained dolphin show. While in the water with them, you get to participate in some of their tricks. In this one, they ask you to swim to the middle of the lagoon and wait. The dolphin comes up below you, you grab a hold of his pectoral fins and take a ride back to shore. Everyone in our group was wowed by this next stunt. While holding onto a boogie board, the trainer asks you to make your body as rigid as possible. Then 2 dolphins swim up behind you, and each one places its nose on the soles of your feet. Then, in unison, they push you to shore at a surprisingly high rate of speed. All in all, it was a great day. Our last stop was Key West, Florida. It was raining steadily, so we decided to simply walk the streets for a while and see what we could see. Key West is incredibly touristy, and you can only go in so many gift shops. So, we ducked into the famous Captain Tony's for a few beers to escape the foul weather. The bar was originally called Sloppy Joe's and was a hangout of Ernest Hemingway's. The interior of the bar is covered with bras, dollar bills, and unique personalized license plates from different states. After Captain Tony's, we walked a bit more and then headed back to the ship. Between a long layover and several additional delays, the trip home the following day was a long one. Our friend Don picked us up at the airport and took us to his house for a very late but delicious dinner that he and Judy had prepared for us. When we finally got home, it was after 2 a.m., and waiting for us was this beautiful Christmas centerpiece that Judy had made and a welcome home bottle of wine. We thoroughly enjoyed the cruise, but it was good to be home. Thanks for watching.